Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking some truly staggering data. And I'll be honest with you right up front, the numbers we're going to look at are heavy, but they absolutely demand our attention. We're diving deep into the statistics behind a critical global health issue, Nigeria's under-5 child mortality crisis. Let's just jump right in and see exactly what the reality on the ground looks like. 856,000. I want you to just pause for a second and really let that number sink in. According to the 2024 data, this represents the total number of children under the age of 5 who lost their lives in a single year in Nigeria alone. It's a massive, almost incomprehensible number, right? But to fully grasp the gravity of this crisis, we really need to understand how it fits into the broader global picture. Get this. Nigeria accounts for 17% of all global under-5 deaths. Think about that for a moment. The country makes up less than 3% of the entire world's population, yet it's carrying roughly a fifth of the global burden of child mortality. And if you look just at the West and Central Africa region, Nigeria bears a staggering 45% of the regional mortality burden. This disproportionate loss of life literally puts the country right at the epicenter of the global child survival crisis.
Let's move into Section 1, the macro stakes, the national picture.
To understand why this is happening, we've got to look closely at the national mortality rates and exactly how Nigeria compares internationally. Now, we can look at this through two slightly different lenses. The international estimate from the UN puts the current rate at 115.6 deaths per 1,000 live births. Meanwhile, domestic figures from the 2024 Nigerian Demographic and Health Survey put it just a bit lower, at 110. Honestly, it's totally normal to see a slight variance between international models and domestic surveys. But regardless of which specific number you're looking at, the stark reality is that Nigeria currently ranks worse globally out of 54 African nations. To put that into perspective, it helps to look at the historical pace of improvement. Let's compare Nigeria to another sub-Saharan nation, like Ethiopia. Back in 1990, both Nigeria and Ethiopia had remarkably similar, extremely high mortality rates, both hovering right around 200 deaths per 1,000 live births. But fast forward to 2020, Ethiopia managed a massive, game-changing reduction, dropping its rate all the way down to 49. Nigeria, on the other hand, saw its rate remain exceptionally high at 114. Okay, moving on to Section 2, a tale of extremes, regional and wealth disparities. You know, looking at a national average really only tells us half the story. On the ground, Nigeria is a tale of massive subnational extremes. According to the 2023 to 2024 data, the under-5 mortality rate is at its absolute worst in the Northwest region, sitting at a staggering 140 deaths per 1,000 live births. Compare that to the Southwest region, which has the lowest rate at 42. And at the state level, the extremes are even wilder, ranging from just 14 in Kwara to an alarming 161 in Jigawa. Geography is quite literally a matter of life and death here. And it turns out, household wealth is just as defining as your zip code. For the poorest households, the mortality rate is 142, but for the wealthiest, it drops to 54. That's a disparity gap of 88 points between the richest and poorest families. While a lot of countries around the world have seen their wealth gaps narrow since 1990, the data shows that Nigeria continues to exhibit the largest wealth-based disparity in the entire world when it comes to child survival. So what's actually driving these massive regional and wealth gaps? Well, the research points to a few deep structural roots. A lot of it comes down to inadequate access to quality child and maternal health care, especially in rural, low-resource areas. It's also heavily tied to an unmet need for family planning, things like childbearing that is too early or too closely spaced. And of course, environmental factors like household poverty, a lack of clean water, and poor sanitation just compound the risk entirely. These are the socioeconomic barriers structurally fueling this crisis. Let's dive into Section 3, the etiology, leading causes of death. We've looked at the demographics, we know the geography, and we've seen the wealth gaps. But from a clinical, epidemiological standpoint, what exactly is causing this crisis? It's a crucial question, because knowing exactly why these kids are dying is step one in designing targeted interventions that can actually save lives. Looking at the roughly 718,000 under-5 deaths in 2023, the single largest cause is malaria, sitting at 18%. That means about 363 children are dying every average day just from malaria alone. Right behind it are respiratory infections like pneumonia at 15%. But you also have to look at the 12% share for neonatal asphyxia, which is suffocation and trauma at birth. Then there's diarrheal diseases at 8.5%, What this reveals is a really critical split between infectious diseases and immediate birth complications. These percentages actually build a very specific, predictable timeline of risk for a child in Nigeria. The underlying causes of death essentially fall into two distinct windows. First, you have neonatal conditions like asphyxia, preterm birth, and sepsis, which are the primary threats during the first 28 days of life. But once a child survives that first month, the threat completely shifts. From 1 month to 59 months old, post-neonatal infectious diseases like malaria, pneumonia, and diarrhea take over as the dominant killers. Understanding this timeline is absolutely crucial because you simply cannot treat both of these windows with the same strategy. Interventions have to be hyper-targeted to the child's age to be effective. Which brings us to our final section, Section 4, the macro trajectory, progress and future targets. Now, despite all these heavy numbers, the situation isn't entirely static. Things are moving. Comparing the domestic surveys over a recent 5-year period, the under 5 mortality rate actually dropped from 132 in 2018 down to 102 in the 2023 to 2024 survey. That's a 22.7% reduction. The data suggests this much-needed improvement has been fueled by an expansion of routine immunization coverage, getting kids vaccines for things like DPT-3 and measles, along with gradual gains in access to family planning services, which has really helped lower the overall fertility rate. But we really have to put that progress into context. Yes, the country has cut the rate from roughly 200 in 1990 down to around 110 today. However, the 2030 United Nations Sustainable Development Goal target is just 25 deaths per 1,000 live births. So the gap between where the country is right now and where the world desperately needs it to be by 2030 remains incredibly daunting. And that leads us to a pretty sobering projection derived from the current data. It reads, under current trajectories, Nigeria is projected to miss the UN SDG target, likely reaching it only after 2050. While gradual progress is happening, and that's great, the current pace is simply not fast enough. Getting from 110 all the way down to 25 is going to require massive systemic changes in healthcare delivery, sanitation, and poverty reduction. Which leaves us with a final, urgent question for you to consider. As these gradual improvements are made, how can we close these deeply entrenched structural and geographical gaps faster to save the next generation? The data shows us exactly where the problem is most severe. It's in the poorest households, it's out in the rural Northwest, and it's happening in those first critical days and months of life. Fixing this is going to require highly targeted, data-informed action from absolutely every sector of society. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.